Hello everyone and welcome to this week's video in the bug bounty course. So today I'm going to be talking about how to get started when you've got a particularly large scope target. Now large scope targets are usually recommended for beginners, and that's because they tend to be really flexible, right? Like you've got a lot of different stuff to look at and look into and to try and hack on. So it can be a really great place to get started because there's a lot more to look at, there's a lot more bugs to find potentially. In terms of the sort of stuff I hack on, I tend to hack on large scopes, but I usually focus on one part of that larger scope. This is particularly useful because when you're hacking, you learn a lot about how the target starts to develop their applications. And by working on a scope target like this, you can focus on it not being too overwhelming, but at the same time, be learning more about how software is developed and how software is deployed on your actual target. And once again, the entire bug bounty course is very kindly sponsored by Bugcrowd. A great hacker needs a great platform, and Bugcrowd is the home of the hacker. They provide hackers with the best opportunities to make money, advance their skills, build community, and unleash ingenuity through their security knowledge platform. They provide distinctive educational content for hackers. You can rapidly pick up new skills through Bugcrowd University or gain practical experience with one of their many monthly challenges. Or maybe you want to follow real hacking experts like myself as we cover methodology, shortcuts, and tools. Bugcrowd has an entire level up series unique to the industry that covers all of that. So if you're interested in joining Bugcrowd, head over to bugcrowd.com/hackers now and join the Bugcrowd community. Thank you very much to Bugcrowd for sponsoring this video. Okay, so what do we mean when we say large scope? What does that mean? A large scope program is really defined loosely as any program of multiple different websites. Usually it's star.domain name, so it could be any subdomain of a target domain name. It could be defined as any asset that is owned by target or that can be proven to be owned by target. It can also include subsidiaries or acquisitions. Now, the thing with acquisitions is that often they'll have like a minimal time. Stuff won't be in scope until they've owned it for a month or 2 months or whatever. Or it might be just a scope that has multiple different products to actually look at, and that are all listed in the scope table, but that all have different, like the different functions, the different stuff to look at. So my example I've got here is the Dell program on Bugcrowd, which is star.dell.com and star.delltechnologies.com. They're really great places to get started because you can define your own unique scope. The downside being that you need to find that scope yourself, and that is where we have reconnaissance. I've actually even seen reports where the company didn't even know that it was theirs and that it was like vulnerable. So it can really be very broad. And certainly if you are looking for that unique scope, you're doing something like subdomain enumerations, you're looking at, say, certificates, searches, you will find that companies may ask you to prove that they own it and give your justification on that as well. So the first thing you might find yourself when looking at these types of targets is really overwhelmed. These large scope targets can be super overwhelming to hackers, especially if you're new. While they're often recommended because you can find that scope yourself and there's more stuff to look at, it is super overwhelming. And if you feel really overwhelmed, you are not alone. Top hackers can feel overwhelmed by dealing with a ton of scope. You want to start broad, trying to find everything, and then make your way down to each application, understanding the boundaries of each. So, for example, Atlassian has a huge scope, but they have individual products like a Jira ticket. And you can use the same main app methodology on that single feature or that single product that they have, so you're not necessarily trying to hack everything. But really, for large scope targets, recon is key. There's 2 different types of recon. Codingo has an excellent article that I will link in the description, where he defines this just-in-time recon, which is a single scan on a single day. It gives you the lay of the land, but it only gives you it at one specific point. A lot of new hackers will do this. They'll run cert spotter, they'll run a mass, they'll do subdomain enumeration, and that's it. And they won't look at it over time, they'll just do one point. Now, people who have a more recon-focused methodology, where I personally think a lot of new hackers fail, is that they don't do this passive or alert-based recon, where these scans aren't just run once, but they're run weekly or monthly, and then anything new is highlighted. And when a lot of the best hackers are talking about their recon process, they're often talking about this passive hunt for new stuff, and this idea of being the first to find something new when something just gets deployed or when something just gets updated, etc. A lot of the hackers that do things like subdomain enumeration might do this as well. There's lots of different ways to do recon, and in terms of a larger scope, actually where you can find bugs is super broad. You might look for subdomains and domains, as we'll see in the upcoming recon video. You might look at code and version control to see if there's any pieces of code that is owned by your target, and then you might want to do a code review, also coming up in a video. You might just go through the applications that they provide and just go through them one at a time, go with the documentation they actually provide you, like in my main app methodology. You might look at third-party services like Slack or integrations within that application. You might look for API keys or data dumps via Google Dorking. You might find documents again via Google Dorking. You might do API enumeration, such as in my API enumeration video, to discover maybe those API endpoints that are up but not being referenced or that you can't find referenced. You might actually just go through the scope page. The scope page will often very clearly say, this is what we have, this is what's in scope and out of scope. You might use tools that tell you the tech stack of something, and instead of hacking an application, you might go, what's it running? You might also look at company news, whether that's through updates or patch notes, to understand what new features have been released. And all of these are valid ways to hunt for bugs on these larger scope programs. There's not just one way of doing it, and actually if you are a beginner, what I really recommend is to focus on what's in front of you. Don't try and do like loads of subdomain searches and building up a full recon pipeline. Look at what's in front of you and hack that first, because that will tell you a lot about how the product is supposed to be used. Subdomain or domain enumeration, trying to find what else is out there. There's two really good tools for it, a mass and sublist. You can usually just provide a name or a single domain name, and it will try and find new domain names or related information from a bunch of different sources. I really like a mass because it has a visual element to it, but either of these tools is really great. If you want to know more about how to do specifically subdomain enumeration and using that as part of your recon process, you probably want to watch my full recon video. But broadly, what are we trying to do? We're trying to find domains that we can attack. You usually won't find a bug with recon alone. Usually anyway. There are some, but for the most part, you still need to do the actual hacking. You need to hack what you find. And it can be hard to identify which domains you need to look more in depth at if you've just got like 30 or 40 subdomains. I really like Jason's The Bug Hunters methodology. And if you want to know more, I really recommend the video from Nahamcon, because he goes into this quite a lot. But fundamentally, we're trying to find stuff to hack. We're not trying to find bugs, not yet. Now, to start to understand this data, there's a few different ways of doing things. A lot of people like just taking screenshots of subdomains and seeing what's there and doing a quick pass through to see what is worth looking at in more depth. A mass has some visualization tools as well. You may want to consider something like Multago if you are a very visual person. You've got to do that understanding element to it, because again, recon alone is not going to find you a bug, and I really want to stress that because I think a lot of people think all you need is recon, but you do need to actually hack things. The bad news for a lot of this is your data has to be formatted in specific ways for these tools, and that doing subdomain enumeration in general can be very noisy and potentially lead to IP bans or WAF bans. And that can be really frustrating. There's ways around it. There's VPNs, but it's really annoying. Screenshots alone may not even be helpful, especially as they only work with HTTP, but maybe it's WebSockets, maybe it's something else, like it's an FTP, and it's not got a secure password on it, so you can hack it, but if you only take a screenshot, you're not getting that full picture. It takes time to go through the data, and you could find nothing. And in general, subdomains alone are very rarely the be-all and end-all of any recon, to be honest. It really is just the first step. And I really want to stress that, because I think a lot of people think, okay, recon, all we need to do is just find bugs, and that's not necessarily the case. Open source intelligence, there's a lot of different ways to get open source intelligence. We don't tend to use a lot of it in bug bounty hunting, just because things like people who work for a company is often just out of scope for us, so there's no point. Information from the dark web, we've seen a lot of debates about whether or not data dumps should be in scope and whether or not people should pay for them. But things like enthusiast blogs and seeing how people might already be bending the security controls, those can be really helpful. So it depends on what we're trying to do. OSINT can also be really helpful for just understanding how something should work. And that's something I really want to stress about finding bugs, is that understanding stage comes first and the hacking comes after that understanding, right? Like, it's just the first step in that understanding. Speaking of OSINT, if you are looking for leaked keys or GitHub in general, I really recommend Trufflehog for that. It's a really great tool that can find API keys, but a lot of people have been running it, so this alone will probably not be enough. Looking into, say, using that OSINT to find developers and what they've committed to, if they've committed to your target's repository, looking through their commits and seeing if they've leaked a key, maybe on a completely unrelated repository, that's where you're going to find bugs, right? It's not enough just to run this once. You have to be, one, constantly running it, that kind of just in time versus the passiveness, but also looking in those slightly weirder places. I will say that overall, you don't really want to complicate things. Even with a larger scope, you don't need a fully custom pipeline to start. You do not need a super complex flowchart. You don't need to get ChatGPT to generate a lot of code. You're just looking for somewhere to start hacking. It's easy to invest in infrastructure around Recon, but without that, you can't use that data. You have to take that step back and think, okay, what does this pipeline look like? What do I actually need from this? And what you'll probably find is you don't need a lot of Recon. You don't need to know every single subdomain. You just need somewhere to start, an application that maybe people haven't looked at as often, and you don't necessarily need these big complex Recon. Or maybe you do. Maybe you're a programmer who, playing to your strengths, you're like, I can write really fast code and make sure it's deployed really well and put alerts up, and something like Recon is then maybe a much better option. Remember, large scope doesn't mean only Recon. It means that Recon is an element of that. Now, there are tools that can tell you what something is built with, like Analyzer, which can tell you, hey, this is running Shopify with Google Analytics or Vue and Nginx by using some fingerprinting techniques. I've also found that error message are really good for doing this, because you'll see Java util error and you're like, oh yeah, that's running Java then. Some other things to keep a lookout for is just strange implementations, and that's very non-specific. But recently I did find a bug where it was like a unique way of doing a GraphQL API, and I hadn't ever seen the GraphQL be called in this way, and when I looked it up, it was only implemented in a few different servers, and then that server implementation was then vulnerable to another attack. So by going into like supply chains, it can be really helpful. Note that a target won't necessarily accept a vulnerability on something they cannot control, but something they can control, like open source software that's been misconfigured, they will pay for. So if you find a bug on Shopify, report that to Shopify. If you find a bug on an implementation of an API framework, that's when you might want to consider doing it to the target, not Shopify. CVEs. There is, and again, a really good talk from Godfather Orwa about Shodan and leveraging Shodan for vulnerabilities. You can actually get access to Shodan for free if you're a student, and it has a vulnerability search. You can put in a CVE and it will show you matching ones. The difficulty comes is, okay, how do you take that and take it back to your target? It's a challenge. There are so many good ways of using Shodan, properly going into things. Again, I really recommend Orwa's presentation because that is how to use Shodan. I watched it live as well, actually. It was very good live. Another thing you might consider is just Google Dorking in general. I put a link to this in the description, but this is just a link of like common Google Docs. And here you can see files containing GC info as a section. Again, you have to figure out how you're going to take that back to your target. Maybe that's adding more parameters. Maybe that's just verifying who owns it, etc. In terms of what your Google Dorking looks like, it depends on the target. The index/API, I find, does nothing. Does nothing for API hacking because most APIs don't have an index. They're usually controlled by a framework nowadays. But it can still be really helpful for just finding interesting stuff. Again, you're not finding a vulnerability here. You're finding something that's worth looking at. You're finding something that you might want to look more deep in depth to. News and updates, going through version histories, going through marketing blogs, really useful ways to understand what an application is supposed to do, and also the kind of flaws it has. Quite often you might just see security issue, but actually if you dive into the patch notes, it might be potentially a bit more information. Again, it's not guaranteed, but it at least tells you what your target is deploying. Now, of course, if you can find something that's newly deploying that's in scope, that is great on a large scope target because you've got somewhere to start. You've got, okay, I can start there, I can start on this new thing, and you're going to be looking at like low competition, bug hunting. Remember, we are not trying to find bugs when we do this. We are trying to find stuff. It might be useful stuff, it might be completely useless stuff. Recon is about more than just that single scan. By doing it over time, that's what really gives recon-based bug hunters their power and skills and how they're actually able to find bugs. If you want to be a recon-focused hunter, you're going to need to invest in pipelines and notes and alert systems and how you respond to those alerts and what kind of things you're even searching for. It takes a lot to invest into that. And quite frankly, when you're a beginner, if you don't already have those skills, there are other hackers who have already developed them and who can find stuff much faster than you can at the moment. Saying that, does that mean you shouldn't look at main scope targets? No. You just need to have some targets. Once you have some targets, just hack them. No different to the main app methodology. Treat each like its main application and just go through it. So start out by looking at how that application works. Think about the kind of security controls that are in place. Think about how you would break some of those security controls. Then try out some payloads, some signs of bugs, and then that will lead you to how you should approach that target in terms of what vulnerabilities to actually look for. Again, the point of a large scope is to do some basic reconnaissance. Once you've done your basic reconnaissance, you just stick to your regular methodology. You don't have to do a recon focus methodology. I think that's really important. So hopefully that was helpful and useful to think about how we might approach a large scope target. In the live stream at the end of this series, I'll be looking at a large scope target and showing you techniques that I would start with. But my techniques are often just look at what's there, pick an application, and just start main app methodology. I am not doing any kind of complex recon. It's not in my skill set. It's not my forte. I don't find it enjoyable. I just don't do it. Saying that, if you do want to learn more about Recon, I really do recommend the Recon video that I put up in the YouTube suggested video thing that pops up at the end of videos. Start there. If you are a new hacker, you just want to do whatever comes next, large scope target, main app methodology, just have a go at actually hacking something. I promise you will learn so much. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much to Bugcrowd for sponsoring this video. Bye everyone.